My name is Marjorie Ellen Carter. I'm 74 years old, a retired head librarian from a small town outside Bloomington, Indiana. A few weeks ago, I had a mild stroke. It was brief, just enough to scare me, but not enough to leave lasting damage. My doctor said I shouldn't live alone for a while. My son Michael offered to take me in. I didn't hesitate. He said it like it was a given, like family did things like this for one another. I raised that boy on my own after his father passed, so when he said it was my turn to rest, I believed him. The drive to his house was quiet. Rebecca, his wife, didn't speak much. She tapped her nails on the steering wheel the entire time, like she was trying to outpace her thoughts. When we pulled into the driveway, she didn't wait for Michael to help me. She opened the trunk, pulled out my overnight bag, and started walking toward the side of the house. I followed, slower, still stiff from the hospital bed. She led me past the front door, around the garden, down 2 concrete steps, and into a side entrance I'd never noticed before. She flicked on the light. A single bulb buzzed above, casting a yellow haze over a narrow basement. There was a dusty sofa against one wall, and a folding table in the corner. A box fan sat on the floor next to an old space heater. She turned to me and smiled, but it wasn't kindness. It was the kind of smile you give when you've already decided something is no longer your problem. We figured this was the most convenient setup for everyone. Quiet, private, no stairs. Just until you're back on your feet. Her voice sounded rehearsed, like she'd said it to herself in the mirror before I arrived. She handed me a flashlight. The switch down here is a little finicky, just in case. Then she left. Just like that. I stood there, alone in a room that smelled like mildew and old paint, staring at a couch with a tear down the middle. My knees shook. I didn't want to sit. I didn't want to stay, but I didn't have anywhere else to go. Michael came down later, holding a blanket and a mug of tea. He crouched to plug in the space heater and said they were still figuring things out, that things had been tight lately with the house, with Becky's hours cut, with Lily's tuition. He said it like a list of excuses, not a conversation. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He didn't mention the stroke. He said, "This is temporary, Mom. You'll be fine in the basement." I slept down here for a week once when we had termites upstairs. "You'll adjust." I looked at him. Really looked. His eyes had changed. He wasn't my little boy anymore. He was someone older, colder, wearing my son's face. He stood to leave. As he climbed the stairs, I heard Rebecca call out from the kitchen. "Make sure she doesn't come up unless invited. We've got enough going on as it is." The door closed behind him. I was alone again. I sat down slowly on the edge of the couch. The springs creaked under my weight. The blanket he gave me was thin. My feet ached. My hands trembled as I reached for the flashlight and set it on the folding table beside me. I stared at the floor. The concrete was cracked near the edges. I traced the lines with my eyes, like I used to trace sentences in old law books at the library. It was cold. Not just the air, but the feeling. Like I'd been placed somewhere to be forgotten, stored away like a box no one wanted to open. That night, I didn't sleep. The heater worked. Barely. It made a clicking sound every time it turned on, like a clock counting down something I didn't understand. I heard footsteps overhead, laughter, glasses clinking. At some point, the dishwasher beeped, but no one came down to check on me. I wrapped the blanket tighter. I thought about my apartment, about my cat, Ginger, still with the neighbor, about my warm bed, my tea kettle, my window plants. I thought about how quickly home could become a memory. In that moment, I realized something that hit harder than the cold. I wasn't welcome here. I wasn't even expected to last long. And maybe that was the point. People look at old women and think they see the whole story. Wrinkles, white hair, slow steps. They don't see the pages we turned when no one was watching. Before my stroke, before the couch in the basement, I was the head librarian at the Indiana Judicial Archive for nearly 40 years. I knew case law better than half the junior attorneys who came in asking for help. My specialty wasn't fiction. It was true. Truth buried in dusty records and forgotten testimony. Truth that mattered when a name on a docket was all someone had. I helped a woman once track down a marriage certificate from 1947. Her husband had been buried in a military grave under the wrong name. She cried when I handed her the file, and I never forgot that sound. I remembered details most people skipped. Court dates, footnotes, misfiled entries. People used to say, I had a brain, like a steel trap. I called it memory with purpose. I ran that library like a courtroom, quiet, structured, precise. Judges knew me by name. Clerks brought me donuts on Fridays. I trained every assistant who came through those doors. But at 5 o'clock, I clocked out and went home. Home to a small apartment above the hardware store, where I raised Michael on peanut butter and persistence. His father died when he was 7. I still remember how small he looked in that suit at the funeral. Sleeves too long, eyes too wide. I promised him that day I'd take care of everything, so I did. I worked double shifts when needed, skipped vacations, sold my wedding ring to pay for his college applications. He wanted to study finance, said he'd make it big. I used to leave early and pack his lunch, even during college breaks. I sent him textbooks every semester with handwritten notes tucked inside. He didn't always say thank you, but I didn't expect him to. I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it because I believed in him, because I thought if I held him up long enough, he'd learn to stand tall and kind. Now, years later, I was sleeping in his basement, eating cold soup off paper plates. He walked past me like I was a task he didn't want to complete. His wife spoke about me like I was a problem to be managed. They didn't see the woman who kept a library running with a skeleton staff. They didn't see the mother who skipped meals so her son could eat. They saw an old lady with a mild stroke and a quiet voice. But I wasn't just a voice. I was the record keeper. I was the one who remembered. And I remembered everything. I remembered the way Michael used to call me Mama when he had nightmares. I remembered how he'd sit on the floor of the library while I shelved books, drawing robots and planets with crayons on legal pads. I remembered his high school graduation, how he cried when he got the scholarship letter. I stood in the back of the auditorium because all the seats were taken, smiling so hard my cheeks hurt. He forgot those things. Or maybe he buried them under mortgages and meetings and a wife who didn't like my casseroles. But I hadn't forgotten. That's what they didn't know about me. They thought my silence meant I'd stop noticing. But silence is where I listen best. It always has been. The walls in the basement were thinner than they realized. Every night, I could hear them in the kitchen. The sound of their voices drifted through the air, vents like whispers dressed in secrets. One night, I heard Michael talking on the phone. His voice was low, careful, but I recognized that tone. It was the same one he used as a teenager when he broke curfew and tried to sneak in unnoticed. He said I was still sharp, but not for long. He was talking about getting medical reviews, about how, if I slipped just once, they could move forward with the guardianship paperwork. He used words like leverage, risk, control. I sat still on the couch, blanket pulled up to my chest. My hands didn't shake from the cold that time. They shook from something deeper. Later that week, I overheard Rebecca saying it again. That if I froze to death, at least the will would be simple. She laughed. Michael didn't stop her. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I memorized every word. That night, I pulled out the watch Angela gave me for Christmas. It was sleek, modern, something I wore mostly to make her happy. She told me it could track heart rate, steps, and even record audio in emergencies. I had smiled at the time, thinking it was too much tech for someone like me. But now it felt like a lifeline. I tapped the screen 3 times. A red blink appeared. Recording. I set the face toward the vent and waited. The next night, they had a friend over. Michael bragged about the house almost being fully transferred. Rebecca joked about dying in the basement being the least disruptive option. They laughed again. I pressed record. I didn't speak to them differently. I still smiled in the hallway. I still thanked Rebecca when she dropped off cold toast or a mug of tea without sugar. But inside, something had shifted. I wasn't collecting pity anymore. I was collecting proof. I found the rhythm of their routine. Mornings were rushed. Evenings were careless. They assumed I couldn't hear well or think clearly. They assumed wrong. I hid the watch under a stack of towels on the laundry shelf. I charged it when they were out. I synced the files through a backup network Michael didn't know existed. He'd forgotten I paid for the basement renovation 5 years ago. I knew where every wire ran. I used an old tablet I kept in a suitcase, still loaded with the same secure apps I once helped install for library records. I sent each file to a folder labeled simply, Prepared. Every recording was date-stamped, time-stamped, and clear. Their voices were unmistakable. Their cruelty was casual, consistent, and deliberate. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew I wouldn't stay silent. Not this time. Each night I sat a little straighter. Each morning, I felt the weight of what I carried. Not fear, not revenge, just truth. They wanted me weak. They wanted me quiet. But I'd spent decades preserving history. I knew how to archive pain without letting it rot. So I kept listening, and I kept recording. They didn't know the basement had ears, and they had no idea just how well I remembered. It was just after midnight when I sat up on the edge of the sofa, pulled my robe tighter, and reached for the tablet I had kept hidden under a stack of old books. The house was silent. Upstairs, the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of wood were the only signs of life. I plugged in my earbuds and replayed each recording, one by one, listening not as a mother but as a witness. I took notes. I checked the timestamps, labeled each file with the precision I used back when organizing legal archives. I drafted a message to Frances O'Donnell, a retired family court attorney I once worked beside. She was known for her sharp instincts and a zero-tolerance policy for manipulation. I hadn't spoken to her in almost a decade. The subject line read, "I need your help." The body of the message was short. Attached were the audio files, a written affidavit, and my personal statement. I reviewed everything twice. Then I pressed send. 5 minutes later, she called. Her voice hadn't changed. It still had that clipped, calm confidence. She didn't ask why I waited. She only said, "We'll handle this. Sit tight. Stay quiet." By 3 a.m., she had looped in Judge Morrow, a retired circuit judge who once asked me to help organize his personal archive. He was the kind of man who still believed in paper trails and spoken oaths. He remembered me. We filed an emergency injunction through the proper channels, citing elder abuse, financial coercion, and unsafe living conditions. A restraining order request was included. Every document was properly formatted, witnessed, and signed. As the sky began to lighten, I folded everything into a manila envelope. I added one last line in my own handwriting. Delivered by hand, from a woman who remembers. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I sat still with the envelope on my lap and the heater humming beside me. At 7:15 a.m., I heard movement upstairs. The water ran. Cabinet doors opened. Footsteps shuffled from the kitchen to the living room. It was a morning like any other to them. I walked slowly up the stairs, clutching the envelope to my chest. My heart didn't race. My legs didn't tremble. I had known worse nights than this. Michael was pouring coffee. Rebecca stood at the sink, scrolling through her phone. Neither looked up at first. I stepped into the room, set the envelope on the table, and slid it across the surface with 2 fingers. Michael turned. Startled. His eyes narrowed when he saw the court seal. "What's this?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I simply met his gaze and held it. He picked up the envelope. Rebecca looked confused. Michael opened it. He read the first line, then the second. His face drained. That was the moment everything shifted. Not with a scream, not with a fight, but with a folder of facts, a quiet woman, and the law she never forgot. The knock came just after 8, 3 sharp raps on the front door. Michael looked up from his cereal, startled. Rebecca froze in place, still wearing her robe. I stood by the table, hands folded, watching. No one moved at first. Then Michael set down his spoon and walked to the door. When he opened it, two officers stood on the porch. One carried a clipboard, the other a calm authority that filled the room before he spoke. Michael Harper, you've been served a protective order under emergency injunction, filed through the Marion County Court. Effective immediately, you are prohibited from contacting or financially managing any affairs related to Marjorie Ellen Carter. Rebecca gasped. Her mug slipped from her hand and shattered on the tile. Michael started to speak, but the officer raised his hand and continued. Your financial activities will be subject to a forensic audit. A temporary freeze has been placed on shared accounts, pending further review. I didn't say a word. I let the silence fill the space where their assumptions used to live. Rebecca turned to me, her voice trembling. What is this? How dare you? We were helping you. I met her eyes and spoke slowly, each word steady and deliberate. You put me in a basement and called it generosity. You laughed about my death like it was a joke. You planned to take everything I had left and made it sound like care. Michael's face turned red. He stepped toward me, hand raised as if to point, but the taller officer moved between us. Any further contact or attempt to interfere may result in arrest. You will be given 1 hour to pack and leave the property. He sputtered. You're my mother. I took a deep breath and answered. I was. But today, I am the woman you tried to silence, and this house is no longer your game board. Rebecca backed away, mumbling something under her breath. Michael's hands shook as he read the document again. It wasn't just paper, it was proof. They packed quickly, no shouting, no apologies, just movement, fast, anxious, messy. The officers stayed until they were gone. When the door closed behind them, the kitchen felt different. Not warm, not yet, but empty, in the right way. I walked to the table and pulled out the chair they said I shouldn't sit in. I sat down slowly, feeling the strength return to my spine. This wasn't revenge. It was recognition of what I'd lived through, of who I still was. Justice didn't arrive with sirens. It walked in wearing a badge and handed back my name. And in that kitchen, with broken porcelain still on the floor, I realized something simple and whole. They had underestimated the wrong woman, and I had remembered just in time. The house was never mine again, not in the way it once was. After the court ruled in my favor and the investigation closed, I chose not to return. I rented it to a young couple caring for the husband's disabled mother, and when I handed them the keys, I felt something lift from my shoulders. I now live in a small second-floor apartment near a park. The windows let in the morning light just right. There's a soft blue chair by the window, and on most evenings, that's where I sit with tea and write. Angela visits 3 times a week. She brings groceries, tidies the kitchen, and sits beside me without asking too many questions. She's the one who found this place and told me it felt safe. I started a fund called The Quiet Anchor. It offers emergency legal help to elders experiencing silent abuse. Not bruises, not violence. Just the kind of neglect that erases a person one discomfort at a time. We partnered with a retired judge and a team of social workers. We take calls. We listen. We tell people who feel invisible that their stories matter. And we help them build a case when no one else will. I began writing letters not long after the injunction. One to Michael, one to Rebecca, and one to Maddie. The letter to Michael was 3 pages. I reminded him of the times I stayed up grading library reports just so he wouldn't feel alone while doing homework. I reminded him how I never once asked him to repay me for tuition or food or clothes. All I ever asked was to be treated with the same respect I gave him every day of his life. I didn't write with anger. I wrote with clarity. I told him the basement didn't break me, but it revealed him. To Rebecca, I wrote only 1 sentence. You laughed about where I might die. I hope one day you understand how much that cost you. The letter to Maddie was hardest. She had slid a card under the door on my second night. I love you, Grandma. Sorry if I was mean. I saved it in my journal. I wrote her back from my desk by the window. I told her she was not to blame, that sometimes adults confuse silence with protection, but real love asks hard questions. I told her she could come to me when she was ready, and I would always tell her the truth. My story was never about revenge. It was about remembering. Not just facts, but self-worth. They wanted me to fade. I chose to stand. Not loud, not angry, just visible. Some nights, I still hear the space heater clicking in my memory. The chill in my bones returns for just a moment. But then I hear Angela's keys in the lock. I feel the warmth of a second mug on the table. That is the new sound of justice. It doesn't roar. It doesn't rage. It waits, and when it's time, it speaks. I never wanted to hurt them. I just wanted the truth to have a name again. Mine.